Good morning, everyone. We are exploring the rich and complicated history of Christianity and studying the Bible in context. We identify bad theology and misconceptions about God, the Bible, and hell, and following Jesus' teachings. If you find this video helpful, please let us know in the comment section below. We'd love to hear your thoughts and your experiences. We are continuing on in our study in the book of Genesis, trying to put it back into context. And when I say putting it back into context, I really mean two things. I mean, one, what was the intent of the original writer? When this was written, what did they intend to communicate? And two, when the readers originally read this, the original readers, how did they understand it? Because we have several thousand years of bringing modern interpretations to it, rather than what was originally intended and how was it originally understood. So I'm trying to put Genesis back into context for you. Here's today's questions. The tree of knowledge, we're going to put that into context. Genesis chapter 3. What's the tree of knowledge? And as I pointed out in the last chapter, there are lots of different ideas about what kind of knowledge did the tree of knowledge impart. Was the tree of knowledge actually real? Was the snake in the garden real? And why were they exiled from the garden? What exactly did they do that was so bad that they would get kicked out of the garden? What's the reasoning behind that? Hopefully we'll be able to answer all those questions for you. Let's start Genesis chapter 3. We're going to be going through verses 1 through 24. I'll stop along the way to make some comments. Here we go. Now the serpent was more crafty than any of the wild animals the Lord God had made. He said to the woman, "Did God really say you must not eat from any tree in the garden?" So here we have this classic story, Adam and Eve. Okay, but she's not called Eve yet, by the way. She doesn't get called Eve until chapter 4. Okay, so when we say Adam, okay, we're actually saying the human. So the human and his companion are in the garden, and this snake comes along and asks this question: must you really not eat from any tree in the garden? Now, let's talk about the cultural background. Why a serpent? Why a snake? Well, the serpent and the snake were important symbols to many different cultures in this region. So if you're talking about Egypt, Greece, Mesopotamia, and Canaan. So this story, of course, comes out of this Mesopotamian region, and they've interacted with other cultures. And this snake is very important. The ancient Hebrews, the original writers, associated it with divination and the tannin. And if you don't know what the tannin are sea serpent chaos monsters. So if you remember when we talked about the first chapter about Elohim, God, Elohim orders the world. The world is without form. It's void. It's in a chaotic state. And he puts order into the world. And it's important in Jewish thought that you understand that God did not destroy chaos. He contained it. So in the early chapters of Genesis, we don't see battles between good and evil. We see kind of a struggle between chaos and order. And it's not really a struggle because Elohim merely speaks and his will is accomplished. And so he orders everything and he contains chaos. And so this serpent is actually a chaos monster. Here's a couple examples of pictures from ancient text about these chaos monsters. Notice the one on the right is more upright, because apparently in a lot of these ancient cultural stories, snakes walked upright. The use of the serpent is also an interaction with the Epic of Gilgamesh. Now again, I want to point out interaction. Okay, don't believe some of these other YouTube videos are going to tell you, oh, they stole the story. They plagiarized the story. No, they're interacting with the story. This was the way that many of our ancient, forebears worked with these oral histories and these stories. They would take them, they would alter them a little bit to make a new point. In Jewish thought, that's called midrash. You take a story, you change something about that story to make a new theological point. That's why in the Old Testament, we see a whole bunch of what we call doublets. It's the same story, but the location may have changed or the characters may have changed. That's why when we talk about the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, It's actually repeated in the book of Kings. They've taken the same story, they've changed the locale. They're both making the same point. But we see a lot of these kind of doublets throughout the Old Testament. So they're interacting with the Epic of Gilgamesh. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, it's a serpent who snatches the plant of life away from the hero and denies him immortality. Here's a little kind of picture of that. That's Gilgamesh there. He's about to eat the plant of life, and the serpent comes and snatches it away from him. Much like in this story, the serpent stops, the human and his companion from coming back and eating of the tree of life through his actions. All right, moving on. Now, the tempter, the serpent, and I do want to point out, at this point, the original writers and the original readers would not have identified the serpent with Satan. We don't do that until centuries later. The snake is not associated with Satan, not yet. Okay, so I'm just going to call him the tempter. The tempter exaggerates the prohibition. In this way, he draws the woman out a little bit, like, interact with me. I'm going to get you to interact with me. I'm going to say something outrageous, and you're going to come back and you're going to correct me. And so he kind of forces the interaction. This exaggeration engages the woman, and she defends God. The woman said to the serpent, "We may eat fruit from the trees in the garden, but God did say, you must not eat fruit from the tree that is in the middle of the garden, and you must not touch it, or you will die." And so now she exaggerates too. He exaggerated, now she's exaggerating. She falls into the same trap. Okay? You're just not supposed to eat it. There's nothing about touching it. "You will certainly not die," the serpent said, "for God knows that when you eat from it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil." Now, the human and his companion, the man and the woman, are already like God. They were created in the image of God, in the likeness of God. But there's something that the serpent is offering to them. You're missing out on something. You're missing out on certain knowledge. God didn't give you everything. God's holding back on you. And this is why he doesn't want you to eat it. Because if you were to eat it, you will become a god yourself. Okay? So the serpent begins to question the nature of God. Is he generous or is he withholding? And as we saw in the last chapter, when he creates the Garden of Eden, we know that in other cultures, other cultural stories, gardens are only for the gods. That's where the gods dwell. But in this story in the Bible, to make a point about Elohim Yahweh, God is generous. He's not selfish. He doesn't withhold the beauty of the garden, the pleasures of the garden. He's very generous and he gives it to his creation. But now the tempter is saying, how generous is he really? Is he really generous? This is how you understood him. But maybe he's holding something back from you here. And why is he holding it back from you? And the temptation is to become a god yourself. That's the temptation. When the woman saw that the fruit of the tree was good for food and pleasing to the eye and also desirable for gaining wisdom, not just knowledge, but also wisdom, not just information, but how to apply that information, how to use it. Okay? She took some and she ate it. She also gave some to her husband who was with her. Now, normally we blame all the ladies at this point. It was your fault. You're the one who gave it to him. Okay? No, okay? It's the man who's standing next to her and didn't say anything. Okay? So we need to take the ladies off the hook on this one. Because guys, according to this story, we were right there. It's like, oh, look at that. He was talking to a snake. Oh, the snake has some interesting points to make. I'm not going to say anything. Yeah. How can we always skip over that part of the story? That he was right there. She also gave some to her husband who was with her, and he ate it. Then the eyes of both of them were open, and they realized they were naked. Now, last week I talked about what is this all about? Remember at the end of the last chapter it says they were naked and unashamed, because shame comes from knowledge of wrongdoing. And so the point was, they had no shame because they didn't realize there was anything wrong. They had no knowledge of wrongdoing. So at this point, they're like, something's wrong. So they sewed fig leaves together and made a covering for themselves. What was the fruit? A lot of people go, apple. It was an apple. That's a very American answer, right? Because apples grow here in the United States. Okay. Some people, okay, especially during sort of the Renaissance period, okay, it was a peach. Okay. Some people think it was the pomegranate. Okay. The ancient Jewish writers thought it was a fig because the next thing they do is take those leaves to cover themselves. So they thought it was probably a fig tree. Which fruit is it? I don't know. Who cares? Which fruit it was is not important to the story, but our ancient Jewish writers thought it was a fig tree. Okay? So they sewed fig leaves together and made coverings for themselves. Now, what happens here? The woman is moved from being content, enjoying everything that the garden has, to discontent by the suggestion that her happiness is found in something she did not possess. Let that sink in. She's perfectly content. She's got everything except one thing. I've got it all. This beautiful life. Food. Oh, but I don't have that one tree. And the tempter comes along and goes, and that's why you're not happy. I'm not happy? I thought I was happy. No, you're not really happy. And God's withholding it from you. So he's not as generous as you think he is. And you can't be happy unless you have it all. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the basis of all advertising in the United States today. You can't be happy unless your teeth are whiter than white. The girls won't like you, the boys won't like you. You can't be happy unless your hair is long and luxurious and has a shine to it, right? Whatever it is, you can't be happy. You can't be happy without this truck or that truck and this car and that car, and you better have them all, otherwise you can't be happy. And we're told over and over again that our happiness is always in that one thing we don't have. And we lose the joy of contentment. We lose the joy of being able to accept all that God has already given us and to enjoy him and his gifts, and we look for something else. Someone is preventing her from possessing it, apparently. Who's preventing her from possessing this wonderful knowledge that she needs to be happy? Oh, it's God. And that, my friends, right there, is the cause of all our divisions in the world today. So you take a look at this, right? I love this cartoon. Careful, mate, that foreigner wants your cookie. Who's got all the cookies? You turn to the person who's only got one and go, watch out for him. He doesn't have any, he wants yours. This is what is dividing us now, is that we have rich billionaires and rich corporations who have hoarded, who are practicing the sin of gluttony, who through greed have gathered all the goodies for themselves, and they point to the people most in need, and they say, oh, they're trying to steal it from you, who I barely give anything. And they turn us against each other. The smart thing for these two guys would be is to slap that guy up the head and take his plate of cookies. You don't need all these cookies. See, it's the ones who overconsume and hoard. They're the problem, and they turn us against each other. That's why we're always pointing to the homeless person and saying, they're the problem. They're not the problem. They're the symptom of what the problem is. Genesis 3, 1 through 24. Right? Then the man and his wife heard the sound of the Lord as he was walking in the garden in the cool of the day. This again is talking about, like I talked last time, the relational nature of human beings, our relationship to God and our relationship to each other. That we are created as relational beings. We require relationship. Without it, we don't know who we are and we don't thrive. As I said in the last chapter, this is the only thing in all of creation that God looked at and said, you know, the man is alone. That is not good. And he created the companion, the woman. We are relational creatures. And so here's God coming down to relate with his creation. This generous God who'd given them all the garden comes and he's going to relate with his creation. Okay? And they hid from the Lord among the trees of the garden. They hid. See, with knowledge of wrongdoing comes shame. With shame comes hiding. And you can pretty much look at a lot of psychology and say, you know what the root cause is? You're hiding because you're ashamed. That's the root cause of a lot of our neuroses and coping mechanisms and things like that. We're covering up. We're hiding. We have shame. We need to deal with that. We need to be open and honest and just bring it out and deal with it. Of course, you can't do that in church because then you're the subject of church gossip and, you know. And I'll be honest, a lot of churches, if you're open and honest about who you are and what your life is, you're going to be wearing that little scarlet letter, right? You'll be shamed, right? Oh, well, we can't have her helped in the nursery because, well, you know, her background. We can't have him do that. So upsetting. But the Lord called to man, where are you? Now, this is kind of an interesting question. This is one of those questions that I had in Sunday school because I was that kid. Teacher, I thought God knew everything, so shouldn't he know where he's at? Shouldn't he know where? But I have a little more adult understanding of this now. I understand why he asked this question. See, the human response to guilt and shame is to hide. Relationships are severed in order to cover up this shame. The question God asked is designed to draw them out of hiding. He knew where they were at. He knew what their situation was, that they were hiding because of their shame. He wants to draw them out, not force them out. See, this is a unique thing, and this is kind of the point that the story is making, is that God is not a God who forces you. He's not a violent God. He's not a destructive God. What we've seen through the chapters so far is this beautiful, loving, creative God who is sharing and generous, that he's a creator and a life giver, not a destroyer. The world's not created through battle and conflict. It's created for the creative will of God, who then gives life. And so here it is. He's not going to force them out. I know what you did. Get yourself out here right now. Where are you? He's drawing them out. He answered, I heard you in the garden, and I was afraid, because I was naked, so I hid. And he said, who told you you were naked? What's this source of information? Here's a good question we should be asking all the time. Exactly where is the source of information coming from? Okay. Have you eaten from the tree that I commanded you not to eat from? Now again, God already knows the answer. Why is he asking it? See, this third question is designed to lead to confession so that the relationship can be restored. God already knows. It's like your mom, she already knows. She's looking at you and it's like, who ate the cookies? She knows. But she's asking because she's giving you a chance to confess and come clean so that the relationship can be restored. So when you go, the dog, she knows you're lying. She knows you're lying, okay? The man said, the woman you put here with me, she gave me some fruit from the tree. So we have a lovely example of blame shifting. It was her, but really, you're the one who gave her to me, so it's really your fault. Okay? See, this is your brother and sister getting together in the kitchen. Who ate the cookies? She did, but it's really your fault because you made them. If you hadn't made them and put them out here on the counter, they never would have been eaten. Okay? A little blame shifting here. She gave me some fruit from the tree, and I ate it. Then the Lord said to the woman, what is this that you have done? And the woman said, and she confesses, the serpent deceived me, and I ate. Now notice the order of things here. The man, the woman, the serpent, because that's going to become important in a minute. So the Lord said to the serpent, see, because now we're going to do them backwards. This creates a poetic chiasm in the text. So we have man, woman, serpent, and then as the discipline is handed out, it's serpent, woman, man. So the Lord said to the serpent, because you have done this, cursed are you above all livestock and all world animals. You will crawl on your belly and you will eat dust all the days of your life. Crawling on the belly indicates that this beautiful serpent, and that's part of what the subtlety and the cleverness of the serpent, all tied up in that word, clever, subtle, beautiful, is now humbled. The serpent was, the original word is that he's very kind of exalted. Now he's humbled. But get this, he's going to eat dust because the crime fits the punishment. What did he get the woman and the man to do? To eat. And so now he will eat dust. He will be humbled. Okay? All the days of your life. And I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and hers. He will crush your head, and you will strike his heel. Now, having done a lot of research on that particular point right there, there's some translation issues there. Because the word for strike and the word for crush are actually the same Hebrew word. So there's no linguistic reason for saying one is crush and one is strike. They should probably both be strike. Strike at. But folks have been trying to create a messianic prophecy out of this. And so they put crush and strike. So there's some translation issues here that need to be attended to. Now, the serpent is humbled and forced to crawl on his belly. He also eats dust, which fits the crime, since he had convinced the woman to eat the forbidden fruit. To the woman, he says, I will make your pains in childbearing very severe. With painful labor, you will give birth to children. Your desire will be for your husband, and he will rule over you. So this is like the Mother West Wind Wise stories. Why do you have pain in labor? Here you go. Here's the reason why. Originally, in the garden, as I told you last week, human beings became co-creators with God. Now, in this act of co-creation, it's going to be harder. It's going to be more difficult. It's going to be painful because of what you've done. As you create life that goes out into this world, it's going to be harder on you. But I want you to notice this other thing. Your desire will be for your husband, and he will rule over you. And this is where you get your fundamentalists and your evangelicals. They'll point right to this verse, boom. And this is why women are subservient. This is God's plan. Men and women are complementary. The man is the head of the family. The woman is subservient. Says so right here, boom. Anybody see a problem with this argument? Julie raises her hand. Yeah, I see a problem with it. I see a problem with it. Because if you understand this, again, in the context of the story, right? Patriarchy is born of the fall. Patriarchy is because things are messed up. This is not God's plan. See, when he put the world together, this is not how things were. It's when the world becomes disordered due to the chaos monster who tempted the woman and the man who was standing right next to her. Now we have patriarchy. Did you catch that? God's original plan was not that men should rule over women and women should be subservient. That's not his original plan. It's a product of what went wrong. Patriarchy was not God's design. It was a result of sin. It's not the natural order. So when somebody points to this verse and says, this is the natural order, you get to say, you're reading it wrong. If we as Christians believe that Christ has undone the fall, then patriarchy is no longer biblically mandated. Did you catch that? See, when you write in Paul, Paul's writing to Timothy, supposedly, it's not actually written by Paul, by one of his disciples, and they talk about women should be quiet in church and all that kind of stuff. That's all cultural patriarchy. That's part of the context. It's not the command of the Bible, it's the context of the Bible. He says, I don't allow women to do this. Why? Because it's offensive in the culture. And then they try to come back here and go, well, this is what God has mandated. No, he didn't. And if Christ has undone the fall for us, then it's definitely not a biblical mandate. Patriarchy is part of the fall. Now we've undone it. To the man, so we've dealt with the serpent, now we dealt with the woman, now to the man. To the man he said, because you listened to your wife and ate fruit from the tree about which I commanded you, you must not eat from. Cursed is the ground because of you. Through painful toil you will eat. And again we have this, you ate the fruit, now it's going to be hard for you to eat. See, crime and punishment fit together. Cursed is the ground because of you. Through painful toil you will eat food. From it all the days of your life. It will produce thorns and thistles for you. You will eat the plants of the field. So all of his punishment is related to all this eating because he ate the fruit that he wasn't supposed to. By the sweat of the brow you will eat your food until you return to the ground, since from it you were taken, for dust you are, and to dust you will return. And as I pointed out last time, the Hebrew word Adam, where we get Adam, Adam, okay, means human being, and it's a play on words. It comes from Adama. Adam, Adama. Adama means dirt. So human beings are just basically dirt. That's what we're made out of. That's what we're going to return to. Now, isn't this interesting? He's going to die. Were Adam and Eve immortal beforehand? Well, probably. In this story, no. Actually, they're not. Like the serpent, the man who ate the fruit must now toil to eat. Like the woman, he will have pain. To be part of a co-creator, to create the food. Remember, he was placed in the garden to work and to tend to the garden. He was to tend to the garden and to guard the garden. Now he's going to have pain doing this. It's going to be a pain for him to get the food. It's going to be a pain for him to be a co-creator. And he will die. I want you to point out, and this is the point of the story. This is the point of the story. This is what the original writers want you to get from this, that God acts as the reconciler. Human beings fail. Human beings fail all the time. In this story, the first human beings fail. And what does God do? He goes forward, he goes to the garden, he draws them out, he brings them to confession, and he reconciles with them. He tells the man and woman that they can still fulfill their destinies. You are still going to give life. You're still going to have children. You're still going to tend to gardens and create food. You're still going to fulfill your destiny to co-create on this earth with me. But it's going to be harder. You're going to be fruitful. You're going to multiply. You're going to enjoy what the ground produces. But it's going to be harder. There have been consequences. We're good. You and I, we're good. But the consequences of what you have done is going to make your life more difficult. The consequences remain, and the pain becomes part of the equation. I think this is one of those things that we need to understand about God because we get it wrong all the time. God constantly is the reconciler. He comes to us. I think sometimes it gets preached in the pulpit that we have to get on our knees and we have to crawl to him and we have to beg him, oh God, please just forgive me, I'm so sorry. God's already seeking us out. God seeks us out. God is that father in the story of the prodigal son. He's standing at the gate, looking, waiting, seeking us out. And as soon as we're there, he rushes to us and he's like, I'm so glad you're back. He's a reconciler. This is the God that the ancient Hebrews wanted to present to all the cultures around them. We want to tell you about Elohim Yahweh. He's this beautiful reconciler. He came to the garden. He knew what happened. And he draws them out, and he gets them to confess. And he reconciles, well, I still want this relationship with you, but things have changed. These are the consequences of what you did. The human, in Genesis 3, the human named his wife Eve, because she would become the mother of all the living. So we learned in chapter 2 that the human being, Adam, which means human, Adam, the human being, when he got his companion, he was able to recognize, I am Ish and this is Isha. We only understand each other in relationship. And so she doesn't have a name until now. He calls her Eve because she is the mother of all. When she becomes a mother in chapter 4, that's when she's named Eve officially. Your name is Eve. That means mother of all. So when somebody tells you that God created Adam and Eve, no. He created the human and his companion, who later were Ish and Isha, who then become the human and Eve. The Lord God made garments of skin for Adam and his wife and clothed them. The Lord said, the man has now become like one of us, knowing good and evil. The man has become like one of us, knowing good and evil. See, this tree imparted something to them. This act that they did imparted something to them. Something happened. There's been a change. There's a lot of questions about exactly what the tree of good and evil was. I'm going to talk about that. I promised I would talk about it last week. I'm going to talk about it this week. He must not be allowed to reach out his hand and take also from the tree of life and eat and live forever. So the Lord banished him from the Garden of Eden to work the ground from which he had been taken. After he drove the man out, he placed on the east side of the Garden of Eden cherubim and a flaming sword flashing back and forth to guard the way to the tree of life. So what is the tree of knowledge? Well, symbolically, because this is a story, folks, this didn't actually happen. This is a story. It's a piece of mythology. I know that's hard if you were raised fundamentalist or evangelical to hear. This is a piece of mythology. It's interacted with other cultural mythology. Our ancient Hebrews did not interpret this literally. Our early church fathers did not interpret this literally. Our early church fathers said it was an analogy, that everything it represented something in real life. So the man represented something, the woman represented something, the snake represented something, the fruit represented something, that they all had, it was a long analogy. And that's how they interpreted it originally, our early church fathers. And then through time, we've interpreted it differently until about the 1920s. Around the early 1900s, 1920s, we got fundamentalism who said you had to accept this literally. So a literal interpretation of this story is not very old. Previously, nobody interpreted it literally. They saw it as symbols and metaphor. So symbolically, what did the tree of knowledge give? I don't think it gave the humans the ability to discern good and evil. You know, we say this is the knowledge of good and evil. And so a lot of people say, well, what happened is they now had moral recognition of these things are good and these things are evil. It told them how to discern between good and evil. I don't think so. And I'll give you a good reason why, okay? Because in other biblical passages, being able to discern between good and evil is actually a desirable trait. And if this is something that's good and desirable, God would have given it to him. Let me give you a couple examples. In Solomon, with King Solomon, in 1 Kings 3:9, Solomon says, so give your servant a discerning heart to govern your people and to distinguish between right, Tob, and wrong, Ra, for who is able to govern this great people of yours. Solomon asked to be able to discern between good and evil, Tob and Ra. These are the same Hebrew words being used for the tree. Okay? So if knowing good and evil morally is a desirable characteristic, why would he withhold it? And why would people ask for it if this is such a bad thing to have? And if they already got it, why does he have to ask for it? In Hebrews chapter 5, verse 14, but solid food is for the mature who by constant use have trained themselves to distinguish good from evil. This is a desirable trait. If you're a mature Christian, you should be able to know this is morally good, this is morally evil. These are desirable traits. So I don't think that's what it imparted. So what's my opinion? And this is just my opinion. You don't have to agree with me, okay? Symbolically, it imparted knowledge that was not meant for them. And this caused a mix of good and evil in human beings. They coveted and attempted to be gods. This is a symbol that we will see that is repeated over and over again in our stories across cultures. To desire something that's not for us because we want to be God. This is the story of Prometheus and fire. He steals something that's not meant for human beings. And there's punishment that follows. This is the story of Frankenstein. Frankenstein messes with the secret of life. And he uncovers the secret of life, which he's not supposed to have, and the disastrous consequences from that. There are some things that men, human beings, are not supposed to know. And in the book of Job, God says, where were you when I did this? Where were you when I created that? These are things you don't know, and you're not meant to know them. There are just some things that we as human beings are not meant to know. But desiring those, see, rather than being content and enjoying what God has given us and all the beautiful knowledge and wisdom that he has given us, and saying, but I want that I don't know. And I want it because then I'll be God. That's what happened. It's the hubris of wanting to be God. And we'll see that play out several times throughout the Old Testament. Tower of Babel. Wanting to be God. That was the problem. Now, in ancient Jewish writings, it suggests that evil only existed in a nebulous state. So you can't have good without evil. You can't have what's pleasing to the Lord unless there are certain things that are not pleasing to the Lord. And so it only existed in a nebulous state as potential, as in a nebulous state of potential, until the first human disobeyed God. Then once it happened, we as human beings now have good and evil mixed in us. It tainted who we were. I think we can see that when Paul writes in Romans, yes, I know that nothing good lives in me. I mean, nothing good lives in the part of me that is earthly and sinful. I want to do the things that are good, but I do not do them. I do not do the good things I want to do, but I do the bad things I do not want to do. That this story is explaining to us, this is why you feel this. Here's the reason why. Because you were discontent with the generosity of God, and you focused your happiness on the one thing you didn't have, knowledge which you shouldn't have, and you only wanted it because you coveted being God. Don't we have a story about Satan coveting, wanting to be God? And he falls. You wanted to be God. And so now you have this battle going on in you, and you struggle with that. I think symbolically that's what the tree of good and evil are supposed to represent. Struggling after knowledge that's not meant for us. So now, what about the tree of life? Some people are like, well, you eat from the tree, you live forever. Well, if they're already immortal, so did he put why would the tree, I don't know, okay, right. Symbolically, I don't think the tree of life granted immortality. See, again, because it interacted with the Epic of Gilgamesh, I think what the tree of life did, and this is how they would have understood it when they heard this story. Oh yeah, we know this tree of life thing, right? That it renewed and restored youth. This is what it did in the Epic of Gilgamesh. If you ate this, it didn't make you immortal. It just restored your youth. We see this in other cultures as well. Epic of Gilgamesh, Fountain of Youth story, those kind of things. Eating it repeatedly, which they were not prohibited from, would keep them young forever. In other words, they could go to the tree, while they were living in the garden, they could go to the tree of life. But they were never prohibited from eating from that tree. So they could eat it and eat it and eat it and eat it. And they would have been perpetually young. But once they are prohibited from eating it, prevented from eating it by the cherub, then they will die. Which is what God said. From the moment you eat of this tree, you will die. Why? Because I'm going to prevent you from eating from the other tree. So I think symbolically that's what they're trying to say. Without access, they will die. What about the cherubim and flaming swords? Okay, so my mom, she's like really into kind of Victorian kind of stuff. She's into antiques. She likes the Victorian kind of stuff. Victorians were really into cherubs. And they look like little sad babies with wings. How many people have seen like cherubs in like Victorian pictures? And so she's got them everywhere. I keep looking at them. I'm like, these are the saddest little babies I've ever seen. They're like supposed to be angels. Why are they all so unhappy? They all look really sad. I don't get that. Okay, but that's not what cherubim look like. The Sumerians and the Babylonians have a similar word for beings used to protect temples and act as intermediates. Okay, Instead of a CH, it's a K, cherubim. So most likely, the idea of a cherubim with a flaming sword came from Sumerian and Babylonian ideas. Okay? Humans who were designed to care for and guard the garden are now expelled from the garden. So what we have is at the end of the story, we have a reversal, we have a twist. You were designed, this is your purpose, to live in the garden, to enjoy the garden and all it has to offer, to work in the garden and take care of it and to guard it. And now the story is reversed. Now there's a cherubim who is guarding the garden against human beings. So that's like a little punch at the end. Here's the inversion. It's an inversion that the garden must now be guarded against humans. Because you have brought these consequences into the world, we need to keep you out of the garden. Okay, so having said all that, looking at this symbolically, looking at what are they trying to teach us? How do these ancient readers understand it? How do the ancient readers understand it? What can this teach us? What truths should we pull out of this? Okay? The natural order of creation is good, and a loving God provides and cares for humanity. That God created good creation, including us. We were pronounced good. The only thing in all of creation that was bad was not having a companion, and he fixed that problem. The natural order of creation is a good and loving God who provides and cares for humanity. He wants to provide and care for you. He puts you in the garden, which was usually saved for gods. And he puts you there. He loves you. He wants to provide for you. He wants to take care of you. Breaking that order, chaos, this introduction of this chaos, okay, is humans coveting God's position. Breaking the relationship and attempting to ascend to godhood. That's the sin. That's what went wrong. And we'll see this repeated in the Old Testament. That's what happened wrong. We begin to covet God's position, God's knowledge, what God has. And we look at him and we say, you're a withholding God. We don't enjoy everything he gives us. We say, you are a withholding God. So I'm going to take over. I want to be you. God as reconciler always reaches out to us to restore the relationship. Think about the cultures they're surrounded with. Oh, you want me not to destroy your village and punish you because you made me unhappy? Sacrifice a child. I want to see some blood. You want to keep me happy so I don't punish you? Do all these other things. Human beings were placed on this earth in the other cultural myths to please the gods and keep the gods happy. In this one, it's inverted. Elohim Yahweh is not a God like that. He is a God who says, I love you, and even when you fail me, I will set the relationship right. I come to you because I love you so much. You are my beloved humanity. I didn't make you as slaves. I made you to be in relationship with me. And God is always the reconciler. We don't have to strive to try to keep him happy. Isn't that strange? That gets preached sometimes from the pulpit nowadays. You've displeased God, so he dropped a hurricane on your estate. You made him angry, so he did this or that. And if you don't turn back to him, he's going to keep doing it. That's not the kind of God we serve. We serve a God who's a reconciler and loves us. The consequences of our actions can linger and be painful. You know, I can remember, well, it's been a number of years. How long ago were the 80s? Like 40 years ago, wasn't it? Oh my goodness. I hate saying that because I'm like, oh, the 80s. That was like, I don't know what, 10 years ago, right? You know, I'm like living back there somewhere. Back in the 80s, the worst possible thing happened. We had the AIDS crisis. Our government ignored it. And even worse, the church jumped up into the pulpit and began saying, this is God's punishment on you. Nonsense. But I can remember in the 90s, when I was in ministry and I'm working with people, and some of them were HIV positive and some had AIDS. And they would look at me and say, I know God forgave me. Why am I still sick? And I had to tell him the hardest thing I have to tell anybody. You know what? God forgives our sins. He's not looking to punish us. He's looking to reconcile with us. But our actions have consequences. Our actions have consequences, and those consequences can linger and be painful. And this is how we need to start perceiving God. God's not sitting up there looking for an opportunity to smite us. Oh, is he going to do it? Is he going to do it? Ah, good, smite. God is this protective father. I like the way that he's described as like a mother hen bringing her chickens together under her wings to protect them. That's what he's doing to us. He's like, don't go that way. That one's going to hurt you. That's going to be destructive. It's like your mom saying, please don't touch the stove. You're going to burn your little hand. God is just trying to protect us from the consequences of what will happen when we start getting too chaotic and out of control. The consequences of our actions can linger and be painful. We're forgiven. We're reconciled with God. God has always reconciled with us. He's like, you're good, but there's consequences. Be aware of that. With that, let me close in prayer. Heavenly Father, we just thank you for these wonderful stories that tell us about who you are and what your character is like. That you are this loving, life-giving, creative God who adores us. And even when we fail, you reconcile with us. And we never have to beg for your mercy. We don't have to beg for your forgiveness. You offer it so freely. And you welcome us back with open arms every time we fail. Lord, help us to understand you aren't trying to control us. You're trying to protect us. Lead us, Lord. Lead us on the path of righteousness, for that is the path that will lead us to blessing. That is the path that will lead us to the best life possible. Let us learn from these stories of who you really are. We just pray this in your name. Amen. And again, I just want to remind everyone, because sometimes, people are like, well, you're teaching the Bible this way, and, that denies the inerrancy of the Bible, it denies the inspiration of the Bible and things like that. I'm not doing that. I think the Bible is one of the greatest works ever produced, that it was divinely inspired, that these stories reveal truths about God to us in unique ways. The problem is, they were written to cultures that are long gone. And we don't understand that now. We have to get back to how they did it. I think God inspired the original writers like he inspires the great poets, the great songwriters of today to put together things that move us in ways that we can understand, in symbols and language that we can understand. I do deny the inerrancy of the Bible. I can point out the errors to you. I'm like, there's one, there's one, there's one, there's one. The Bible doesn't need to be inerrant for us to find truth within it. So again, I just want to remind you that. Once again, if you found today's content helpful, please be sure to subscribe to our channel, like and share this video, or leave us a comment. If you're a fundamentalist who's right now trying to hit your cap lock key and tell me what a heretic I am, go ahead, it's all right. It helps our community as well as our YouTube channel. We thank you so much, especially if you made it to the end of the sermon. I always joke that, there's a very fine line between a long sermon and a hostage situation. So I know I walked that fine line. Okay, so let's close with this benediction. As you leave this place, let us strive to find contentment in all that God has provided for us and never covet or become gluttonous in our desires. God bless you all. Go in peace. You are dismissed. Thank you.
We are one in Christ, we are one in God, we are one in unity. We are one in truth, we are one in